40 minutes after a cop snapped cold steel on my wrists, the town that arrested me started disappearing from federal maps. If that sounds like a conspiracy theory, good, because that's exactly what they said about me in the beginning. Let me ask you something before we go any further. If it were you standing by a gas pump with a badge in your face, would you talk? Would you fight? Or would you wait? I wasn't in Millbrook to make a point, or pick a fight, or prove anything to anybody. I was there because my mother had a stroke 3 days earlier, and I couldn't sleep until I saw her with my own eyes. 8 hours on the road from Fort Bragg, a black Ford pickup that hums louder when I'm worried a dashboard full of snacks I barely touched. The sun was still low enough to paint everything that warm church picnic gold when I pulled off Highway 78 and rolled into the only gas station in town, Pete's Stop and Go. White picket fences, flags on porches, a hardware store with a window display that hasn't changed since the Clinton years. You know the place. Peaceful, at least at first glance. I stepped out wearing a green jacket I've had longer than some folks keep their jobs. It's nothing fancy. Sturdy quiet blends in. It also hides a life you don't advertise on Main Street. I stretched my back, felt that road trip stiffness fade a notch, nodded to an old man picking up a newspaper, smiled at a young mom wrestling a toddler into a car seat. I told myself, breathe, just breathe. You're almost there, room 314. Grace Grant, your mother, the only voice that can still put your shoulders down with a word. Inside, a teenager with tired eyes and a name tag that said, Isabella. Scanned the counter like someone who's learned to read trouble from 10 paces. I grabbed a bottle of water, a sports magazine for Mom, a news weekly for me, and tried to act like the kind of man who isn't counting minutes he'll never get back. Isabella watched me the way a small-town clerk does when a stranger walks in, tall and black and focused. Not mean, not scared, just awake. Morning, I said. She nodded. Can I help you find anything? Just this, I said, then lowered my voice. Everything good out there? She flicked her eyes toward the window and back to me, a tiny move that said more than words. You've seen that look, right? The one that says someone's watching and it isn't friendly. Someone's watching, and across the street a patrol car sat too still for too long. I clocked it without meaning to, because my brain keeps track of angles the way other people keep track of birthdays. The officer inside, later I'd learn his name was Nolan Barrett, had the posture of a man who enjoys being the only problem in a problem-free town. He wasn't eating, wasn't writing, wasn't talking. He was waiting. For me. I paid cash, a 20. Told Isabella to have a better day than the one she was having, and pushed open the door into that harsh, flat morning light. That was the moment he moved. The cruiser rolled across the street and angled into the lot like it owned the pavement. A second car slid in behind him, not aggressive, more like a shadow. Officer Tyler Stone, young fit, still wearing that posture you only see in rookies who joined to actually help people. Barrett stepped out slow like a TV cop who knows the cameras are on. Keys jangling, belt heavy, chest out. He didn't say hello. He didn't explain. He just let the badge do the talking until he decided to move his mouth. Sir, I need to speak with you, he said before I'd even hung the pump. His hand hovered near his weapon, in that theatrical way some men think is power. He told me there had been break-ins. He said the suspect matched my description. He turned up his radio to let everyone hear it. It was a story looking for an ending. If it were you, what would you have done? Would you fill the silence with your resume, your good intentions, your innocence? Or would you let the silence do the work? I kept my hands where he could see them. Fingers spread, palms open, movements slow enough to make a yoga teacher proud. "I got here 15 minutes ago," I said. "The clerk can vouch. I'm on my way to the hospital." Barrett didn't want the hospital, he wanted my fear. He tilted his head like a dog, hearing a frequency only he appreciates. "Mind if we look in your vehicle?" he asked in a tone that didn't leave a real choice. "I do mind," I said, calm as a Sunday morning, "and I don't consent to any searches." Pattern interrupt. "Wait, this is the part where people ask why I didn't say what I am, why I didn't pull a card. I don't carry, make a call I could have made, end it before it began. Here's why. Sometimes power isn't something you wave around. It's something you keep in your pocket until the system shows you exactly who it is in its own handwriting, on its own cameras, with its own words. Because you can argue with a man's memory. You can't argue with your own tape." Barrett took my license like it was a victory. "North Carolina," he announced to the parking lot, like geography was a chargeable offense. He asked what I did for work, and I told him the only version that fits in a small town without starting a different kind of storm. "I work for the federal government in security." He rolled the word around like a marble he planned to swallow. "Security, huh? Mall cop, night watchman, or something else?" He smirked because he thought he'd found the soft spot. He stepped closer. Inches. Breath. "Around here we cooperate," he said. "You'll leave when I say you can leave." Then he said it. The phrase men like him say when they want everyone listening to believe it's about behavior, not skin. These types. The air tightened. Isabella's phone was up behind the glass. Tyler shifted like the words hurt his ears enough to reach his backbone. The young mother by her SUV slid her child in and stayed eyes wide like she knew she was watching something bigger than a gas station conversation. Barrett moved for the cuffs the way a bully moves for a fist. Quick, certain, proud. Click. That sound. It's the same in every state, same in every cell block, same in every parking lot where dignity gets taxed. "Resisting," he said loud enough for the bystanders to hear. "Acting suspicious." He told me I was casing the store. He told me he saw maps and cash. He told me to shut up. Boys like you never know when to shut up. My jaw locked. My voice didn't. "I'm not resisting," I said. "I'm asking you to be careful with your words." He laughed because men who are used to winning don't recognize warnings that don't come with shouting. The holding cell in Millbrook is the same holding cell you've seen everywhere. Concrete that smells like old sweat steel that remembers every knuckle. It met fluorescent lights that buzz like they're irritated to be awake. I sat, and the coffee Tyler slid through the slot, steamed in a crooked paper cup. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. "You said the hospital," he muttered. "Grace Grant," I answered, "room 314. Dr. Emily Chen. Specifics. Details. The kind of truth that doesn't flinch." He swallowed. "Do you mind if I verify? I'd prefer you do," I said. On the other side of the wall, Barrett was writing fiction on an official template. He talked about advanced surveillance techniques like noticing the exits in a rural gas station is a felony. He listed multiple denominations of cash like $20 bills, and ones mean you're about to knock over the register. He held up GPS printouts from my glove box and called them maps of the area, the way a child holds up crayons and calls them weapons. He read it aloud to the room because he needed the applause. The chief, Arthur Dawson, sat in the back like a man calculating percentages, not justice. He nodded at the idea of holding me the full 48 hours, because in places like Millbrook, time is money, and bodies are budgets. Pattern interrupt. Listen. By the time I finished that second coffee, a different clock was ticking. Here's what most people don't know. Certain phones aren't just phones, they're lifelines. If they go dark too long, someone far away asks why. If they stay dark, someone else starts looking at a map. You can call that paranoia, or you can call it what it is. Responsibility for people whose names you won't read in the paper until you do, and then it's a memorial. Dr. Emily Chen called the station because my mother's agitation wasn't good for her blood pressure, and because Dr. Chen isn't the kind of woman who lets men with badges rewrite reality on her watch. Tyler answered. "Millbrook Police," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I'm looking for the son of my patient," Dr. Chen said, and then she gave him my name, my height, my truck, my promise to be there by noon. Tyler looked down the hall to my cell, and then at Barrett, who was still performing for the room. He turned his face to the wall like a man trying on courage in the mirror. 5 minutes later, the station phone rang again, but the temperature dropped 10 degrees you couldn't measure on a thermostat. The chief answered, because men who run money machines like to be in charge when unknown numbers light the board. "Chief Dawson," he said, polite like sugar on poison. "This is Colonel Robert Keller," the voice replied, calm, clipped, "and not from Millbrook. I understand you have one of my soldiers. Silence is funny. It's loud when it wants to be." You could hear it through cinder block when that sentence landed. The chief closed his office door so fast the blinds rattled. He hung up sounding 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older. Then he called for Barrett and Stone and 2 others and shut the door again. When he came back out, his face had the color of milk left in a hot car. He walked to my cell holding a ring of keys like it was an apology. "There's been a misunderstanding." He began, sweat shining on his temples. "We're prepared to release you." I stood. "What do you call it?" I asked, when a man invents crimes to justify his prejudice. He flinched because men like him don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as managers of order. "We can settle this professionally," he said. "Colleagues to colleagues." "We are not colleagues," I said quietly. "We are a citizen and a department that forgot what its oath meant." He opened the door anyway. Tyler handed me my property, hands shaking, eyes steady. My phone lit up with missed calls that weren't for public consumption, and secure messages that don't belong in a story like this, except to say, "The machine notices when the wrong person goes missing." In that front room, in front of everyone who had been watching me like a specimen, I turned and looked at Barrett and asked one final question. "Are you sure you want this to be your story?" He smirked a smirk that cost him everything. "I decide who's guilty," he said. "Remember that line." I walked out under the same sun I'd walked in under, but the light was different. It's always different once something breaks. I drove to the hospital, found room 314, and sat beside my mother. I read from a magazine while the news trucks set up outside, and nurses whispered about the man who was supposed to arrive hours ago. My mother squeezed my hand and looked right through every easy lie I tried to tell her. "You're here now," she said, "and that's what matters." She was right, and she wasn't. Because what happened in that station wasn't just about me. It was about a town built on a story it had been telling itself for years. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. By lunchtime the next day, a subtle wind started blowing through Millbrook. Emails, acronyms, federal letterhead. HUD suspended the Community Development Block Grant that had kept projects afloat, pending a civil rights compliance review. DOT flagged highway funds, pending documentation on traffic stops and profiling. DOJ Civil Rights Division requested 5 years of arrest data, broken down by race, by officer, by outcome. The Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency asked pointed questions about hostility toward military personnel within local law enforcement. The FBI opened a civil rights file because when you repeatedly write resisting on reports that look like copy and paste, and the video doesn't match the ink, they start to connect dots. Mayor Susan Walters reread a single paragraph until the words blurred and then read it again, because panic makes you believe letters can rearrange themselves if you ask nicely. Chief Dawson sat among boxes that suddenly looked less like an office and more like evidence. Barrett told anyone who would listen, and a few who wouldn't, that he'd followed procedure. That's the oldest chorus in the American hymnal of abuse. I followed procedure. I was protecting the community. I had reasonable suspicion. Do you think that's fair? 6 a.m. 1 week later. Black SUVs flow down Main Street like a funeral for the old order. Doors open. FBI, DOJ, Civil Rights, DCSA, Treasury. Not small talk, not bluster. Warrants, checklists. A choreography you only see when a lot of powerful people agreed off camera that enough was enough. City Hall, Police Department, Mayor's Office, Barrett's house on Elm. At the station, they boxed files, imaged drives, photographed the wall where stop data used to live on a clipboard and now lived inside a system that could be audited. They found the ledger where civil forfeiture wasn't a rare tool, but a steady stream that topped off the budget. They found training notes that were really scripts for how to turn dignity into disorder on paper. In Barrett's place, they found screenshots and emails that people always called jokes until the punchline lands in court. They found deposits that didn't line up with the pay stub math. They followed the trail from bragging rights to bank accounts, because the truth is corruption almost always keeps receipts. Tyler Stone stood there watching his entire education burn, and he made the only move that saved his soul. He carried a box out of a back room and placed it in front of an agent. "These are the reports we altered," he said. Voice steady, hands not. "These are the charges we filed and later dropped the stops that never made it to the official count, the notes we were told to delete." You could feel the air change, the difference between suspicion and confirmation. Whistleblowers aren't perfect people. They're people who get tired of lying to themselves. Barrett didn't get to make a speech. They took him in his driveway at 6:15 a.m., cuffed by strangers who didn't need his respect to do their jobs. He shouted the lines bullies always shout. "This is a mistake, you can't do this. Do you know who I am?" And for the first time in a long time, none of those sentences landed anywhere useful. The chief went next for conspiracy and failure to supervise. The mayor, too. Fraud on federal grant applications that claimed civil rights compliance while the town was running a traffic stop tax on the wrong kind of drivers. While all that was happening, Dr. Chen still had patients to see because high blood pressure doesn't stand aside for justice, and a stroke doesn't pause for a search warrant. Isabella still had to work her shift because rent doesn't care why your town is trending on the evening news. She handed over her video to the investigators and filled out forms and answered questions, and then months later opened an email that said she had a scholarship with her name on it. Because courage deserves a runway. Court took a while, the way court always does when it's done by the book. The day Barrett finally stood in front of a federal judge, he looked smaller than the uniform that used to make him feel big. "Under color of law," the judge said, and that phrase hit the room like a drum. "Deprivation of rights," he continued, and the legal language, dry as it is, felt like water on a fire that had been burning quietly for years. 8 years. That was the number. 8 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release restitution to the people he stole time and dignity from, and a permanent bar on holding the job he'd used like a hammer. The chief got 6. The mayor got 4. Some of you will say that's not enough. Some of you will say it's too much. That tension, That's America arguing with itself. The department didn't get abolished. It got rebuilt. A new chief, Maria Santos, took the chair and didn't pretend it was a throne. Every policy went under a microscope. Use of force, rewritten, retrained, audited. Traffic stops, recorded, reviewed, publicly reported. Hiring, reworked to find people who believed law enforcement means service, not revenue. A consent decree settled in like a house guest who does the dishes and looks under the sink to make sure you're not hiding anything. It's not glamorous. It's not fun. It's necessary. Yeah, that happened. The economics, though. The economics hurt. When you stop funding government with unconstitutional shortcuts, you find out how much honest governance costs. HUD money stayed suspended, pending proof that patterns had changed and would stay changed. DOT funds required data, not promises. Civil forfeiture cash, that easy, unaccountable drip, dried up. Businesses closed because federal employees, contractors, and curious day trippers stopped spending money where they've watched the news show a place they don't trust. The hospital fought until it couldn't. The census ticked down like a slow leak in a tire you keep meaning to patch. Painful. Real. Unavoidable if you're going to do it right. 2 years after the cuffs clicked, Millbrook wasn't a town on paper anymore. The land stayed, the people who loved it stayed, the sky still threw pink at sunrise and coins of light at sunset. But the incorporation was gone. The memorial plaque that used to sit by the door at Pete's Stop and Go was moved to the county courthouse because the gas station closed and nobody wanted to leave the marker in a lot that would turn into weeds. It reads simply, "To those who didn't look away." I went back. Parked on gravel that used to be pavement, walked to that plaque and read it like it was a letter addressed to both of us. Tyler pulled up in a Henderson County Sheriff's vehicle and stood beside me in silence until silence finished what it had to say. He asked finally, "Do you ever wish you'd ended it right there at the pump by making the call?" He deserved the truth. If I'd done that, I said, he would have told a different story. One where he was a hero who stood up to a pushy outsider with a fancy title. He would have learned to hide it better. He would have kept teaching rookies how to smell danger where there was only dignity. We needed their system to admit what it was. On tape, in ink, in numbers. We needed the wall opened so you could see the rot. Do you think that's fair? That a town loses its name because of the choices a handful of people made and others tolerated? Or is that the cost of disinfecting a wound that's been covered with a bandage of slogans for years? My mother moved to an apartment in the next county when the hospital closed. Closer to rehab, closer to what she needed. She never called Millbrook evil. She called it unwell. There's a difference. Sick things can get better. But not if you pretend they aren't sick. Here's the part I don't want you to miss, even if you think everything I've said is an exaggeration wrapped in a speech. Every system has default settings. In Millbrook, the defaults were suspicion framed as safety, revenue framed as law, obedience framed as respect. Those defaults will exist wherever the incentives point the wrong direction. You change them by measuring the right things, by rewarding the right things, and by making it painful to do the wrong things. You don't fix it with one arrest or one headline or one gotcha video. You fix it with a line that becomes a policy, that becomes a habit, that becomes a culture. People ask me if I'm proud of what happened. Proud isn't the word. I'm relieved some nights. I'm angry some days. I'm sad most mornings when I think about the businesses that closed and the families that had to move because their town's budget was propped up on the backs of people who looked like me. I'm grateful for Tyler, for Isabella, for Dr. Chen, for a judge who read the law like it was written to be used, not just quoted. I'm tired too. There's a cost to waiting quietly, while you know you could end it with a phone call. That cost comes due in a holding cell, in a look from a man who hates what you represent, in a mother's voice trying not to worry, because worry is a tax on healing. Let me leave you with this story in a story. An epilogue, if you want to call it that, or maybe a beginning. Months after the last federal monitor filed the last quarterly report and left town, a young deputy, in a county 2 states over, pulled a driver for rolling a stop sign. Black man, clean car, nervous, because men like us never know which script we're walking into. The deputy walked up, introduced himself, and said, "We record every stop. Your video is already uploading. Here's why I pulled you. Here's your license back. Drive safe." The driver asked what changed. The deputy said, "We read about a town that disappeared from maps. Sometimes the lesson travels farther than the people who paid for it ever will. So now tell me, what do you think? Was this justice overreach or something messier in between that we don't have a neat word for yet? If you were at that pump with me, would you have talked? Would you have fought? Would you have waited? Have you worn a badge and felt trapped between what you were told to do and what you knew was right? Have you stood on the other side of that badge and learned to keep your hands at 10 and 2 because dignity is expensive? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Defend your view, challenge mine, tell your own story if you're ready. Share this with someone who still believes corruption only wears suits and lives in big cities. And if you want more stories where receipts beat rhetoric and quiet patience moves mountains, subscribe, stick around, and ring that bell. Because the next chapter isn't about outrage. It's about what we build after the dust settles. You know what I mean?